privilege, see him perform miracles, that maybe somehow our faith would be strong. But it wasn't the case. If you read through the gospel accounts, you'll see that the disciples spent several years with Jesus. I mean, they had the privilege and they had every benefit. They got to walk and talk with Jesus on a daily basis. There's no better preacher. There's no better teacher. There's no better discipler. There's no one who could have given them any more than they had received. Not only that, they saw miracles that we would maybe die just to see one. They saw many. It started with the wedding feast in Cana, where Jesus turned water into wine. And then toward the end, right before he goes to the cross, he raises Lazarus from the dead. That I don't think you can top. Seeing someone actually come out of the grave. So you would think that these disciples had the greatest faith. But there are a number of times where Jesus uses a phrase that is very similar across the number of passages that are mentioned. In Matthew 8:26, if you remember, they are in the boat with Jesus, and there's a storm. And so they wake Jesus up and they say, Jesus, don't you care that we're going to die? So Jesus gets up and he calms the storm. Now they, of course, are in awe, they're stunned, but Jesus says something to them. In Matthew 8:26, he says, and he said to them, why are you so cowardly, you men of little faith? He says they're cowards. I mean, I don't know about you, I've been out on a boat in the ocean, and if you start thinking about it, if there was a storm, it'd be pretty scary. I mean, you could easily drown. So it's understandable that the disciples were afraid. But then Jesus says, why are you so cowardly, you men of little faith? And then he gets up and he rebukes the winds and the sea, and it became perfectly calm. It must have been such an incredible contrast here, the storm, and they think they're going to die, and then Jesus creates a perfect calm. It's perfectly calm. But what maybe wasn't so calm was their hearts, because Jesus says, why are you so cowardly? Now in Matthew 14, there's another time where the disciples are on a boat and Jesus is not with them this time, but then they see Jesus coming to them walking on the water. Now, I don't know about you, sometimes when you read the Bible and you read passages like this, you might think this just doesn't seem very real. Like this does not happen every day, of course. But you have to give it to Peter. Peter sees Jesus walking on the water, and Peter says, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come out and walk toward you. So Jesus says, go ahead, come. So Peter actually gets out of the boat and he starts walking on the water. Now, if you were Peter, what would you be thinking? I don't know about you. If I was Peter, I would be thinking, whoa, I'm walking on water. How can this be? He starts to take his eyes off of Jesus and he starts to sink. And it says in Matthew 14:31, and immediately Jesus stretched out his hand, took hold of him and said to him, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Why did you doubt me? I mean, Peter should have known. He shouldn't have doubted. He should have trusted. Now, granted, it's something that is actually impossible for us to do. We cannot walk on water. But if Jesus says so, would you doubt him? If he says, come, walk on the water toward me. I mean, this is Jesus. It's not about you. In Matthew 16, after Jesus was talking with his disciples, and he said this phrase, watch out and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Watch out and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Now, the disciples, they weren't quite sure what Jesus was talking about. They thought, oh no, Jesus is not happy with us because we don't have any bread. But Jesus, aware of this, said, you men of little faith, here in Matthew 16:8, you men of little faith, why do you discuss among yourselves that you have no bread? And Jesus reminds them, if we need bread, you remember when I fed the 5,000? Having bread to eat is not an issue. But the disciples didn't get it. And he says again, you men of little faith, why would you question me about bread? You're not actually listening to me. And one other scene in Matthew 17, Jesus casts out a demon that the disciples could not cast out. In Matthew 17:20, he talks to them and he said to them, because of your little faith. He says, you couldn't do it because of your little faith. But then he says, for truly I say to you, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible to you. Now, a mustard seed was probably one of the smallest seeds that they would have been able to identify. And Jesus is saying, your faith is so little. And don't you realize all you need is the faith the size of a mustard seed? It's not that you need to have such great faith. It's the one in whom your faith is placed. You know, your problem is not the amount of your faith. Because if you even had just a little bit in the right object, you could do the impossible. You men of little faith, you of little faith, you men of little faith, because of your little faith. So having little faith is a problem. And the disciples showed this a number of times throughout the time they were with Jesus. Now, we've been going through Hebrews chapter 11. And if faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen, but if you did get to see, then why did the disciples struggle so much? I mean, they got to see with their own eyes. They got to hear with their own ears. They were in the presence of Jesus. And even then, Jesus said, oh, you men of little faith. Now, when we think of the Old Testament saints that we have been looking at through Hebrews 11, they were all challenged to live by faith. And you have to remember, until Moses, they didn't have a written copy of God's word. So they had to trust with what they heard from God. Now, Moses wrote the first 5 books, so at least by the time at the end of Moses's journey, they had the Pentateuch, they had the law, they had what was revealed to them from God. And if we turn to Hebrews chapter 11, I just want to lay the groundwork a little bit so that by the time we get to verses 30 and 31, we are reminded of what we are looking at. Hebrews 11, 1-2 says, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen, for by it the men of old gained approval. Whose approval? Well, they sought the approval of God. They weren't concerned so much of the approval of man. Hebrews 11:6, and without faith it is impossible to please him. For he who draws near to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. If we were to put it another way, I would say it this way. It is only by faith that you can please God. To draw near to God is to believe that he is who he says he is, and that he will reward those who seek him. Now, last time we looked at the life of Moses, and again, as I reflect on his life was one of a persevering faith, right? I mean, he had to have had such a difficult life leading the nation of Israel. I mean, I can't help but think every day must have been a stressful day. The complaining, the grumbling, the criticizing. I mean, there must have been days where he just woke up and he just must have been sad. The nation as a whole did not live by faith, even though they too were privileged to see the miraculous. I mean, they got to see the 10 plagues. They got to come through the Red Sea. They actually were fed every day. They received a miracle every day in the manna that God sent. In fact, God sent it every day until they crossed the Jordan River and they ate of the produce of the land of Canaan. And it says in Joshua 5 that the manna stopped that day. But for 40 years, every day they had food. Now, I don't know about you. Food's kind of important, right? You agree? Getting food every day is kind of a big deal. In fact, if you're to simplify life, if you had food given to you every day, what else do you need? Right? I mean, I just need to eat. I mean, I don't need too many clothes. I just wear my Dodger jerseys every day. If I just had food every day, I'd be good. But no, these people cannot be content with that, right? Onions, leeks. We want to go back to Egypt. Even the food, they complained. But you know what was particularly significant was that there were leaders amongst the congregation of Israel who rebelled against Moses. Now, Aaron and Miriam, his own brother and sister, went up against him, and they were taught a hard lesson. But there's a guy named Korah. Turn to number 16. And the reason I want to contrast Korah with, we're going to look at Joshua, is here was a leader. He was of the tribe of Levi. And he took 250 leaders of the congregation and led them in a rebellion against Moses. And it says that they were men of renown. Now, they were of the tribe of Levi. Korah was already one who had been separated to perform service for the tabernacle. He was one who ministered to the congregation, but he wasn't part of the priesthood. He wanted the priesthood. He was ambitious. And so he went up to Moses and he said, "Hey, Moses, who do you think you are? Why do you exalt yourself among us? You're no more deserving than we are of being a leader." Now, if you have to remember, did Moses actually want to be this leader? No. Remember when God approached him through the burning bush and he's like, God, no, thank you. I mean, I don't even speak well. But not just that, it must have been such a daunting thing to consider. How do you lead a nation? But Moses humbly submits. He humbly does what God asks him to do. And you would think it's hard enough to try to coordinate just logistically. I mean, just administrative, right? And they didn't have Excel spreadsheets and databases and planners and so forth. You can only imagine how difficult it must have been every day to coordinate a nation. But then there's a rebellion. And Moses he basically puts it this way. Okay, let's let God take care of this. You show up tomorrow morning, okay? Show up with all your gear. Show up with your sensors. Let's then see what God does. And Moses, he does something that's, maybe some leaders might wish they had this ability to do, but it would be dangerous. He calls out Korah and he says, okay, everybody, you don't want to be anywhere close to Korah and his tent, his family. Move away. Because if God is on my side, they shouldn't just die kind of a regular death. They should die in such a way so that you would know that they are being judged for what they are doing because they have treated God in an unholy way. So Moses says, if what I say is true, let the ground open up and swallow them all alive to Sheol, to the grave. And that's exactly what happens. The ground opens up, swallows up everyone who followed Korah. There are two guys named Dathan and Abiram who also were part of this rebellion. All of them are swallowed up. And then it says the ground closed up over them. Now, I don't know about you. Again, if you were to read that text and you just kind of read through it for your quiet time, you're like, all right, I guess he's dead. But think about the significance of this. Moses, what he really needs is the support of other leaders. But there are some leaders who are so selfishly ambitious for themselves. Korah was one of those. And he led that rebellion against Moses, and he paid the price. Now contrast that with the story of Joshua. Joshua was faithful. In fact, Joshua was one of the only two spies when they sent them out from Kadesh Barnea toward the beginning of the 40 years. And he and Caleb were the only ones that said, yes, the land has giants. Yes, it is as what was described, but we should still go forward and conquer the land. Joshua was not afraid. Now, he and Caleb, even though they were faithful to trust the Lord, they actually had to suffer and wait for 40 years so that that generation would die out before they could enter the promised land. Now let's go to Hebrews 11:30. And it's a very short sentence that covers a lot of ground. Hebrews 11:30 says, by faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. Now, if you grew up in Sunday school, I am sure you heard the story of Joshua fought the battle at Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Okay, maybe that was just me, but it's a famous story. Or at least if you saw Veggie Tales, okay? There's a Veggie Tale version of the story of Joshua and the Battle of Jericho. But let's back up a little bit before the walls of Jericho fell down. At the beginning of the book of Joshua, you have to remember, now Moses is dead. Who was Moses? The greatest leader that Israel ever had. Moses had led the nation by faith for 40 years. The nation was characterized by their lack of faith. Now, the one time that the nation actually does have faith is when they go through the Red Sea. Right? They're trapped. Here's Pharaoh's army. Here's the Red Sea. They're caught in between. They're grumbling against Moses again. And Moses says, you just wait and see God do his work. So God splits the Red Sea. They walk through dry land, but that was an act of faith. What would you do if you were part of Israel at that time? And you're like, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. Oh, the Red Sea is opening up. Oh, there's dry land. Now Moses is saying, let's go. Would you go? Now you might weigh the odds. Pharaoh's army, die. What if I go through the Red Sea and what if like someone like pops it or something and it just drowns the rest of us? Like, you know, some dodo head's going to do that. They just want to touch it and see, well, you have to have some faith that this thing's going to hold all the way through, right? But the whole nation goes through. So together, collectively, they act in faith. But that's the last time. The rest of the time, they didn't. They doubted. They acted in unbelief. So they had to wait 40 years. Now, 40 years later, they are on the eastern shore of the Jordan River. Moses has gone through the law a second time, the book of Deuteronomy, and then Moses is taken. He gets to see the promised land, but because of his disobedience, when he hit the rock instead of talk to the rock, and God said, you did not honor me before the people. And so just because of that, he didn't get to go. But remember, he still persevered, living by faith to the very end. Now, Joshua is the successor to Moses. How would you like to be the successor to Moses? I don't think I would want that job. Now, you know, I mentioned this to some people and they have no idea anymore because it's just old, but John Wooden was the most incredible basketball coach for college basketball of all time. He won 10 national championships. He won 7 in a row. No one has ever accomplished that. From 1964 to 1975, he won 10 championships, 7 in a row. He retires after he wins his 10th. He beats Kentucky, the only time he ever beat the University of Kentucky. Since then, they've beaten them a bunch of times. But then he says he's going to retire. Now, imagine who had to follow him. Do you even know the name? Do you even know the name of several who followed after that? There's Gene Bartow. There's Gene Cunningham. There's Larry Farmer. No one cares about them. They were actually really good coaches, but they could not duplicate what John Wooden did. In fact, UCLA doesn't win another national championship until 20 years later, 1995. Now you're like, why do we need to know all that? You don't. It's just because I like UCLA. But it's similar, right? I mean, here's Moses. Who wants to follow? So Joshua, this is a daunting task. So how's he going to do it? How is Joshua going to follow Moses? We'll turn to Joshua chapter 1. And we're going to look at portions of Joshua because this gives you an idea of what leads up to the Battle of Jericho. It says in verse 1, now it came about after the death of Moses, the servant of Yahweh, that Yahweh spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' attendant, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. So now arise, cross this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving to them, to the sons of Israel. Every place on which the sole of your foot treads, I have given it to you, just as I spoke to Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, even as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and as far as the great sea toward the setting of the sun will be your territory. No man will be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, to be careful to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn aside from it to the right or to the left, so that you may be prosperous wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way successful, and then you will be prosperous. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be in dread or be dismayed, for Yahweh your God is with you wherever you go. So as soon as Joshua takes over, God speaks to him. And he makes promises to him that he is going to fulfill his promise that he made, starting with Abraham. Right? Remember when we looked at Abraham, and Abraham had faith that God would fulfill his promises, even though he would not get to see that fulfillment. But he passed on that word to Isaac, and Isaac passed it to Jacob. Jacob passed it to his sons, that God would fulfill his promises. So here is God now telling Joshua, I am fulfilling the promises to inherit the land. Every place on which the sole of your feet would tread, God is going to give to you. No one's going to be able to stand against you. And just as he was with Moses, God would be with Joshua. And God says, I will not fail you. I will not forsake you. These are promises. Now ask yourself, bring it to today. Has God made you promises? Have we heard maybe some similar promises? I mean, has not Christ said, I will be with you? I will never leave you or forsake you. I mean, that's a promise. He will never fail us. He will never forsake us. So if you have that promise, how does that then affect how you live? Do you think in the midst of all the challenges of your life that somehow God is going to abandon you? Is God going to fail you in some way? Like, is God just incapable? I mean, does he not have the ability to do what he says he will do? I mean, ask yourself, do you ever question God? You question God's motives? Why, God? Why do you do this? Would God ever want bad for us? Does God want evil for us? No. But he does ask us to do something, to be strong and to be courageous. It's never been different. And essentially it's this: have faith in me. And you be strong, but it's not in your strength. Be strong in my strength. Be courageous, not because you in yourself are able to accomplish things. Be courageous. Go against the odds. Take the risks. What others might say is impossible, you know I'm going to take care of you. So be courageous. Don't be a scaredy cat. And in being strong and courageous, there are other things that come along with that. Be careful to do according to all the law which Moses commanded. Take my word and do it, obey it. In fact, don't let it depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night. Maybe one of the reasons why we struggle with being strong and courageous, because you forget to go to the place where you draw that strength and courage, and that's God's word. You see, God's word is really the source which helps us to be strong in his strength, to take courage, even though circumstances are difficult. So that's God talking to Joshua. Look at Joshua 1:10. It doesn't even say that Joshua responded to God. It just says, then Joshua commanded. You know, Joshua was really, I guess you could say, a military guy. It essentially was, yes, sir. There's no question. There's no negotiation. There's no challenge. There's no rebellion. It is, I will do exactly what you tell me to do, God. And he says, okay, people, in 3 days, we're going to cross over the Jordan. Now, that's an act of faith. Why? Because the Jordan River, it wasn't just like a little tiny dribble. It was deep. It was wide. There are portions where it is narrow and maybe not as deep. But where they're about to go through it's not a simple task. He reminds the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, because they had asked to settle on the east side of the Jordan River. But he said, remember, you promised you would help your brothers, your fellow tribes, conquer the land. So Joshua reminds them of this. Now note Joshua 1:16. Okay, this is the people answering to Joshua. And they answered Joshua saying, all that you commanded us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we listened to Moses in all things, so we will listen to you. Only may Yahweh your God be with you as he was with Moses. Anyone who rebels against your command and does not listen to your words in all that you command him shall be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. Now, this is why it's really important for you to read context. You read from Exodus to Deuteronomy, the nation of Israel. They are grumblers, they are complainers, they are rebels. But now the new generation has arisen. And Joshua is now the leader. And they tell Joshua, everything, all that you've commanded us, we will do. Wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we listen to Moses in all things, so we will listen to you. Only may Yahweh your God be with you as he was with Moses. Now, verse 18 is what really gets me. This is what the people say. This is not what Joshua says. The people say, if anyone rebels against your command and does not listen to your words in all that you command him, that person shall be put to death. And then they say, only be strong and courageous. Now bring that to today. Let's just kind of put some application here for our church family. One day I say, hey, everybody, Lighthouse Bible Church, LA, you know what? We are going to go plant a church. And you might go like, what? We can't plant a church. We're a dinky little church. Who are we to plant a church? Okay, John, you're taking it too far. I don't think we should do this. So someone leads a rebellion. I don't want to use anyone as an example because that would look bad, but let's just say, Joe Schmo leads a rebellion. And I say, okay, you want to lead a rebellion? Okay, if you're sitting next to Joe Schmo here, you might want to move away because, he's kind of questioning my leadership here. So if what I'm saying is representing God, may the ground open up and swallow him and anyone who follows him. So Joe Schmo gets swallowed up. You're like, whoa, okay, that's crazy. I guess we should go plant a church. But now you're like, nah, come on. That's not practical. So we have to wait 40 years. 40 years to plant a church. Let's see, I'm 57. 97 years old. Okay, let's go plant the church now. And everyone who doubted, we had to wait till you died. So a new generation comes and says, we are ready to go. In fact, we are so ready to go that if anyone disobeys your command, he's going to be put to death. That's the people saying that. Now, that's kind of crazy. Because that's how dedicated they are to wanting to be different from the previous generation. They want to obey. They want to follow. They want to do what God tells them to do. And they say the same thing that God has told Joshua. Only be strong and courageous. Only be strong and courageous. So the people are acting in faith. They're not being unfaithful like the previous generation. So you go to Joshua 3. Joshua prepares the people to cross over the Jordan River. So he tells the priests to take the Ark of the Covenant, go into the river, and then the river backs up. And so it's dry ground. And so now the nation of Israel crosses through the Jordan River as they are still standing there in the middle of the Jordan River with the Ark of the Covenant. And so after they all pass, then in Joshua 4, he tells the people, take 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, and we're going to build a memorial where we're going to lodge. But we're also going to build a memorial right there in the river. And the memorial was to cause the people to what? Remember. That's the whole point of a memorial. Remember what God did here. Remember God acted on your behalf. Remember God is the one. Only God could do this. Who else could stop a river? Just like who else could split the Red Sea? Don't forget that God is with you. Don't forget that God will take care of you. He will fulfill his promises. Don't doubt. Remember that when you see this memorial. Now in Joshua 5, now this is why I think you have to really think a little bit more about this. This is all faith. Because in Joshua 5, Joshua then says, okay, a bunch of you, Ben, you were born during this 40 years of wilderness, and there's something we didn't do. We didn't circumcise you. Now, I don't know, guys, think about this. Joshua comes up and says, okay, guys, sorry, we overlooked one thing here. We're going to have to circumcise all of you. Now, ladies, of course, you don't have to worry about this, but I don't know. I could imagine someone complaining, like, why? Why do we need to do this now? I mean, you could have done it when I was a baby, when I wouldn't remember, right? You're supposed to do it back then, but no, you want us to do it as an adult? I don't know about you. I'd be like, can we pray about this? I mean, do we have to? And Joshua says, yes. That's it. There's nothing else. So you know what? They all get circumcised. Now, I don't know about you. You might think, well, I guess there are maybe certain physical health benefits to that. Maybe there's something helpful about all that. No, I don't know. They're having to trust their leader, telling them to do something that just might seem very, very ridiculous. But this is to set them apart as God's people. It's to remind them of who they are. That's what matters. Now you get to Joshua 5:13, and they are now on the other side of the Jordan River. They are facing Jericho. Joshua, in verse 13, says, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, are you for us or for our adversaries? He said, no. Rather, I indeed come now as commander of the host of Yahweh. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and bowed down and said to him, what has my Lord to say to his slave? The commander of the host of Yahweh said to Joshua, remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. I should remind you of another story, right? When Moses went to the burning bush, and God speaks to him and says, take off your sandals, because the ground where you're at is holy. This is God speaking to him. Then you go to Joshua 6, and this is where God gives Joshua specific instructions. It's as if God says, okay, Joshua, here is the military strategy for the conquest of Jericho. Listen carefully. So you can imagine Joshua, he's thinking, all right, there's going to probably be a lot we have to do. It's a fortified city. The walls are thick. We'll probably have to build a ramp. It's going to take a lot of work. I mean, this is what normally would happen in a walled city. But instead, God says this, for 6 days, take all the men of war and walk around the city once. Don't say anything. Just walk around the city once. For 6 days, do the same thing. On the 7th day, take 7 priests. They'll carry 7 trumpets of ram's horns, shofars, and take the Ark of the Covenant. And on the 7th day, they will march around 7 times, and then the priests will blow the trumpets, and then the people will give a great shout. And the walls are going to fall down. Now, I suppose if you took this portion of Joshua and went to Annapolis or, West Point and said, okay, 5-star general, here we go. Here's the strategy to conquer this wall city. They would laugh at you. And I mean, this would be ridiculous. This is why it takes faith. They're asked to do something that makes absolutely no sense. But note that Joshua immediately obeys. He does everything that he is told to do. And in turn, all the men at arms, the armed force, the priests, everyone does what they are asked to do. There is complete obedience. They don't question, they don't criticize. I'm sure there are probably some in the people who are kind of watching, the Israelites, who are probably thinking, this is just whacked. I mean, what's this going to accomplish? And you better believe that those in Jericho, as they are looking over their wall, they must be laughing. They must just be laughing and going, you Israelites are so dumb. What are you doing? You're wasting your time. But why does God do this? He wants to make sure both the Israelites and those in Jericho, as well as the Canaanites, who are going to hear of what happened, that this is all by the hand of God. And this is what's going to set the tone for the conquest of Canaan. Israel is going to see that God fights for them. The Canaanites are going to see that the God of Israel fights for them. So you go back to Hebrews 11, verse 30, and it says, by faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. That had to be a long week. Can you imagine? Now, I've been to Jericho. It's one of the oldest cities in the world that's been uncovered. It's not really big. It was actually kind of funny. We walked around and like about 25, 30 minutes. In my mind, I'm thinking big city, big walls. Actually, not that big. Would have taken them about 25, 30 minutes to go around. So not that long. They would have been done, I don't know, with all their army going around Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, every day. Maybe it took more time to get ready than to actually walk around. So as each of the first 6 days go by, they go and they come back. What do you think was going on in the minds of the Israelites? I'm sure that there were some thinking, you think it'll work? Like, do you think it's actually going to happen? Now, 7th day is a big day because the 7 priests are going to come. And then they're going to bring the ram's horns. You know what a ram's horn, what kind of sound it makes? It's kind of funny. It's just like, remember when we went to Israel, Pastor Patrick, he bought a shofar. He's blowing it in our hotel room. And it's not easy to do. So he's trying, he's like, and I'm just thinking, this is what they did around Jericho? I mean, I think those in Jericho are probably just laughing. They're like, those kind of sound lame. It doesn't sound like something that a conquering army would have. And what's that box they're carrying around? It looks like it has some angels or something on it. Like, what's that all about? You see, everything about this doesn't make sense to the Jericho folks. You got to think that the Israelites are probably maybe a little embarrassed even, like, we look stupid, don't we? We look stupid. Some people are very concerned about looking stupid. You might think, hey, if Pastor John did something like this, I'd be like, I don't know. I don't know this guy. Why? Because it'd be embarrassing. You would think, why would you do something that just doesn't make sense? Joshua, if there's anything to learn from Joshua, he is the one who sets the tone for the rest of the people. He is immediately obedient. He does all that he is commanded. He is strong and courageous in the Lord. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't hesitate. He acts according to what God asks him to do. And I think, we have much to learn from that. Are we going to do all that we have been commanded to do by God? Are we going to be strong in his strength? Are we willing to take the risks that call for courage? I think a lot of Christians are cowards. And the reason they're cowards is because they're not walking in the strength of the Lord. Yeah, sometimes it doesn't make sense to the world. It doesn't make sense to maybe your family, your friends, to follow Christ. But are you unflinching in your devotion? If Jesus says it, I do it. I don't question. I don't negotiate. I don't hesitate. There's so much to learn from Joshua. He was willing to risk. That's what his faith was all about. And because of that, the rest of the people followed suit. And the walls of Jericho fell down. Go to verse 31. And this is Rahab. By faith, Rahab the harlot did not perish along with those who were disobedient after welcoming the spies in peace. Now, this is the last person that's mentioned in this list that has commentary. Okay, in verse 32, he says, there's all these other folks. He doesn't really explain. The author of Hebrews doesn't give any other explanation. But Rahab's the last one. And it's very interesting that she would be the last one. Because if there's anyone that I think most people would probably say, how did she make this list? I mean, this is a short list. This is the Hall of Faith. This is inscribed for eternity. Rahab. And who is Rahab? Verse 31. By faith, Rahab the harlot. She was a prostitute. Now, I don't know if, this goes back to Joshua 2. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a summary of it. So Joshua sends 2 spies. The 2 spies get into Jericho. They go to the house of Rahab. Now, it's interesting, reading through several commentaries, merchants or travelers would often go to the house of a prostitute for the reasons that why people go to a prostitute. But they'd also lodge there too. And so for cover, these 2 spies go there. Now, some commentators try to temper the story by saying Rahab was just an innkeeper. So they take that kind of line of, travelers come and they go to a place like this. No, she was a prostitute. She was a harlot. The word here in Hebrews 11 is very specific. It is a prostitute. She has absolutely no honor or repute. But as she took in travelers, maybe it was because she heard the stories of what happened in Egypt. Because it says later, she tells the spies, I heard what happened, that you came through the Red Sea after you left Egypt. We saw what you do. We heard what happened to the 2 kings of the Amorites. You utterly destroyed them. So this whole city is trembling in fear because of your God. Not because of them, but because of your God. Now you got to think, she had no church to go to. She had no Bible. She had nothing other than what she heard about Yahweh, the God of the Israelites, who destroyed the Egyptians, who brought the Israelites through the Red Sea. And in some way, she was granted faith to believe. This is just amazing. I mean, what gave her reason to do this? So when, turn over real quick to Joshua 6. I'm sorry, Joshua 2. And look at verse 9. So she came up to the roof and said to them, I know that Yahweh has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. For we have heard how Yahweh dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. Indeed, we heard it, and our hearts melted, and a courageous spirit no longer rose up in any man because of you. For Yahweh your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Somehow she was able to have a view of God because of what she heard. And she understood that Yahweh, your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. She feared this God, and she wanted to follow this God to the point where she was willing to go against her own people. You see, she hid the spies, and she lied. The king said, hey, we heard you had 2 spies. And she said, oh yeah, they came, but they left. Now, a lot of people look at that and go, they make a big deal about, well, she lied, so is lying okay? Because the angle there is, well, can we lie? Can we lie? No, you're not supposed to lie. Because God says repeatedly, do not bear false witness. There's actually really no justification to use the story of Rahab and say it's okay to lie. She lied. But you have to understand the context for Rahab. She doesn't have the 10 Commandments. She doesn't have the law. She doesn't have revelation. She just knows this. I've heard of your God. I want to be with you. I want to follow your God. So I'll protect you. Now, should she have lied? Would there have there been any other way? I don't know. We just have the story. It just happened. But she had this like raw faith that was not very informed. So she hid the spies, and she sent them on their way. And she said, please spare me and my family. So the spies said, okay, this scarlet cord that we're using to get out, leave it hanging over your window. Have everyone in your household. And when we come, they got to be in the house. If they're not in the house, we don't have to deal with this promise. So when the walls fall down, there is one home spared, and that's the home of Rahab. Now, you know what's really incredible about the story of Rahab? She gets married to a guy named Salmon, as in the fish. We don't know much else about Salmon, except Salmon and Rahab had a son named Boaz. Boaz met a Midianite woman named who? You remember the story? Ruth. Ruth and Boaz have a son named Obed. Obed has a son named Jesse. Jesse has a son named David. Now you might go, okay, that's good. At least I can win some Bible trivia now. You ask that question. No, do you understand how significant this is? She is a prostitute, a Gentile. R. Kent Hughes says this way: it is most significant that the final person to receive individual commentary in the list of champions of faith is a woman and a Gentile and a prostitute. Rahab's faith, a prostitute's faith, is given as an example for all who desire to have true faith, especially those who know they are sinners and who deep down want to be pleasing to God. She knew she was a sinner. She was a prostitute. She had no claims to saying she had such great qualifications to be a believer. She just desperately wanted God. And she becomes part of the messianic line. And her name is mentioned. Rahab, as a champion of faith. Now, you know what that should do for you? You might think, I don't know, I've got a really messed up life. I got junk in here that I haven't even told anyone about. I don't know. I don't qualify to be so godly, so spiritual. You know, all that God asks is, he says, trust me, follow me. Trust that my son, he paid the price for your sin. Trust me. You know, the people who had the biggest issue with Jesus, they were the people who thought they were too good. They thought they were too good. They were better than the prostitutes and the tax collectors. They thought they were above the rest. I think this list of those who are being acknowledged, and for sure there are many others who we could say would be examples of faith that are not mentioned in Hebrews 11. And that's why the writer goes on to say there are a whole bunch of others. In verse 32, Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel. I mean, I think of even like Daniel. There's so many other names that are not mentioned. But isn't it interesting that the last one that would receive some commentary is Rahab? I mean, if there's anyone here who thinks, you know what, I don't qualify. Why would God take someone like me? He took in Rahab. Rahab exercised this very, you could say, you know, just very uninformed, raw, crude faith. But she knew she wanted to be on Yahweh's side. How about you? You can bow your heads as we prepare for communion.